What must we do to avoid a crisis, and what do we do when we are already in one? Just for the record, I looked up the definition of the word crisis, which originated from the Greek language, and it turns out that crisis in the general sense of the word means a choice, a kind of evaluation, a judgment of the situation, a struggle, but a struggle that is necessary to address hastily. Elsewhere, a crisis is said to be a turning point for change for the better or the worse. We have crises that arise from sudden events, like, for example, an earthquake, but we also have crises that are the accumulation of specific conflicts. These conflicts are inevitable, for they are inherent in the very structure of society. What do you do when these crises arise in relationships? The best way is to avoid crises, through prevention, of course. Of course, by taking proper care of relationships, many crises can be avoided, and the cost of going through these crises can be minimized, as it were. But certain situations in life cannot be avoided because life is dynamic. We are dynamic beings, and change is the only constant thing around us. The moment we have two people in a relationship, and each of them is subject to this influence, and they have to work out all of these things in themselves to function effectively, to be happy in the relationship, because that's what relationships are for, to enhance our inner peace and happiness. In general, sometimes things can spiral out of control for us, become too big to handle and surprise us, with some very strange outcomes at one point or another along the way. On the same principle, there is a crisis in relationships, which is usually the result of long-term actions. Of course, I'm leaving out situations where sudden illnesses, accidents, and other such events occur. Leaving crises alone leads to tension, anxiety, and the breakdown of bonds, trust, and respect. And this is just something that puts our relationship to the test. I would add that a crisis, on the other hand, has excellent potential to bring a powerful qualitative change to a relationship, where we need to redefine, for example, our priorities, redefine our communication, modify the level of our respect, all the values that are in the relationship. So, a crisis has the potential to bring change to a relationship. Only this potential needs to be channeled. This potential is a turning point, and the change will be for better or worse. Today, the divorce rate in the Western world, which we represent, is very high, and it shows that the majority lacks the skill to resolve these crises in the correct phase of the relationship. Of course, some relationships cannot be saved for very different reasons. Crises happen even in the best relationships. Crises are the kind of challenges that life throws at us all the time. After talking to people who have been in a relationship for, say, 50 years, they all speak in the same way that building things together gives them great joy. But the real strength of the relationship comes from the difficult things they went through together that put pressure on them and wanted to push the partners away from each other, yet they survived against all these circumstances, and it gave them strength for years to come. Such couples say that this also gives the most excellent satisfaction in the relationship, because they are aware that you have to be able to go through certain things in a relationship. And now the question is, how do you do it? The best way to escape a crisis is through prevention. The most straightforward technique is to go on dates, except that such dates in the style of just going to the movies and for ice cream are not enough. Such dates are very cool, but you also need to talk about specific topics, because we have such a few basic questions that we should discuss regularly. What do you think about our relationship? What do you think about our relationship with our children? What do you think about our sex? What do you think about our finances? These questions will naturally arise over time when we don't have conflicts. If we bring up these topics with no high tension between us, we are not yet so set against each other in a bad way, then it is easy to open up, talk, and explain. It would be good if this becomes our habit. You can go to a dance course together, you can go to the pool, you can go on a nice trip. There are a lot of ways to build the positive side of a relationship, but you certainly need help to avoid such topics. That's why you need to form habits over the years of a relationship, because if you don't, crises come. You can always create such new habits. If we already have this crisis, it is worth diagnosing it quickly. I sometimes hear in consultations how many people say, once there comes such a huge hit of crisis, a big hit of such hostility, mistrust, and tension in the relationship, then things come out that started many years ago when something happened there, and we kept quiet about it, but we were both resentful. We never really talked it through, processed it together, learned the lesson. Sometimes you have to say quickly that there's a crisis in some sphere. Of course, not to demonize it as evil. You must talk calmly and directly. Honey, we are making a series of financial decisions here, and I do not agree with you in this sphere. Another thing to do when a crisis occurs is to get out of the circle of negativity quickly. It's just shocking how quickly tensions rise during a crisis when we are negative. People are capable of arguing over a breadcrumb. This is often called a spiral of negativism, or more profound and deeper. And even when we already know why we're arguing, everything is still interpreted so negatively, and we spur ourselves to some such bad behavior that we wouldn't normally do. This is called the blame game, which means the other person is always to blame, so you must take control of the relationship as soon as possible. So what's the point? I have 50% responsibility for the relationship, and you have 50% responsibility for the relationship. You take your share, and I take my share. We think evenly about what we can do and try to lower this hostile atmosphere. Long-term persistent negativity naturally spills over into the home and the children, which is a domino effect. That is why it is not worth indulging in it. This is one of the most challenging things in conflict resolution when we have to conclude that each of us has 50% power over the relationship. Of course, when there is a situation of infidelity, financial fraud, or other things, you know that this person has to take responsibility for his part. But I would add that I have reliable evidence of marital relationships surviving infidelity. One partner cheated, but when they later analyzed together all that happened, it turned out that they had already lived very poorly with each other for many years, very routinely. Betrayal is nothing worthy of praise, but it did show clear evidence of the relationship breakdown. Those who worked through it together are now a wonderful married couple. They found their solution to the problem. That is, we get out of the circle of negativity and take responsibility for our 50%. The next thing is to make a detailed analysis. That is, to find what led to the crisis. Sometimes outsiders are very useful. And I do not mean here to go immediately to a psychologist or psychotherapist, because it is generally the case that we are alone with these problems. There is pressure to preserve pride and keep up appearances and not say anything to anyone. Of course, I don't recommend talking about marital problems, for example, to people who have gone through a divorce, because we start to open up to people who have gone through the worst possible scenario. The idea is that two people who are very lonely, living on a lonely island, will eventually kill each other at some point. At least, that's what Pastor Mark Gunner, who made such a great series about the brain of a woman and the brain of a man, and he is just a marriage counselor, says. He talks about simply having the kind of friends you talk to about things. It doesn't mean that you reveal some intimate news about your spouse or secrets. However, the thing is, many of these problems we have are typical problems. It's typical that men don't understand women, that women don't understand men. It's typical that both men and women need to open up sometimes and talk it out. And then that pressure drops, and some kind of healthy, normal perspective comes back. I would recommend talking to aunts, uncles, grandmothers, and grandfathers who have been in relationships for a long time and who have such a stoic calm and will tell you, for example,
"Honey, there is something better for you behind this crisis. Don't worry."
Or they will tell you the usual.
"Have a cry, talk it out."
Of course, you can go to a psychologist, especially if you have never been. It's good to have that circle of friends you can meet with whom you talk about specific topics, where you talk about marriage or raising children. In this changing, dynamic world, where only one thing is constant, which is change, it's simply worth having that broader social support for our relationship. And it's essential, especially if the crisis has been brewing for many years, and you need to give yourself time for the emotions to subside. In the parable of Solomon, we find such a description that wisdom built her house and put it on 7 pillars. Here comes a significant word, strategy. This strategy must be tailored to the marriage in question. Some people know nothing about the languages of love, and systematically pass each other in building a solid emotional bond, which is simply the basis of all relationships. They pass each other by, and this pressure keeps building up. On the other hand, other people know nothing at all about the fact that they have different personalities, and simply this lack of understanding systematically polarizes them. Therefore, this requires arranging a particular strategy, which can only be implemented in specific time sequences. There are so many different causes of conflict that sometimes it takes us a while to get to the bottom of it, adjusting those tools we have acquired, and this new way of getting to know each other, a new way of being with each other. Why are these problems worth solving? Well, these problems are worth solving because even if we decide to break up and enter a new relationship, we always take the things that were unworked in the current relationship into the new one. These are our suitcases, and we move on with them. That's why it's worth making such changes. When we have moved far away from each other, whether physically or mentally, sometimes when things are already really bad, a breakup can be advised. It is a reasonable solution then, but if we understand that the crisis is this turning point and has great potential for a good change in our lives, then we will also have a different perspective on it and can approach it more consciously. I invite you to the next section. If you liked the material, leave a like and send it to a friend or someone close to you who may benefit from this knowledge. If you want to support our work and help us create more valuable videos, there is a link in the description.